Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Art of Wildlife Photography. My name is Zhayynn James. It's spelled Zhayynn, but it's pronounced Shane. And if you need to know more about that, that's a separate webinar. But I'm glad you guys could make it today, and we're going to get right into it. So let's get started. So the topics that we're going to be covering today is, firstly, where to start in wildlife photography. Second is the composition, which is the critical part of photography. And third, which is about knowing your subject. So even if you're not necessarily a photographer, but you're an animal lover, this is something that would be critical to you. The first thing is, what is photography? When I say what is photography, I mean emotionally, what is photography? So for me, photography is the art of telling a story without words, because that's what you do. There's no narration, there's nothing. So when you see an image, that image has to immediately evoke an emotion, because that's what a good story does. So now there are so many different genres of photography, right? So right from fashion to product to food to wedding to landscape to street photography, journalistic photography, sports photography, underwater architecture, astrophotography. In every one of these, the image is telling a story. There's something that compels you to look at that image and to wonder what's going on. And so no matter what the genre of photography is, that's the key to it. So which leads me to the next question. So what is fundamentally different in wildlife photography from other genres, from most other genres of photography? Right? So in most other genres of photography, as you would have seen before, you have some semblance of control, whether it's controlling the lighting in product photography or in food photography and stuff like that. You know where to position the subject, you know where to position yourself, you control the lighting, you control so many different things, right? So even in sport, you might not control the sport, but you know at what time it starts, you know at what time it finishes, you know what direction something is going in, right? But the difference in wildlife photography is that you have no control. You don't control the subject, you don't control its actions. All you can do is prepare yourself and wait for the moment to capture the action. So as in this case, with this hula gibbon that jumped across from one tree to the other with its baby. All we could do is stand and wait. We were hoping it would jump. Would it jump? We didn't know. When would it jump? We didn't know. Was it going to go left to right, right to left? We didn't know. So all of this is kind of symptomatic of wildlife photography. So where to start in wildlife photography? This is one of the most common questions that I get, especially from a lot of photographers who want to explore, young photographers, is where do I start in wildlife photography? So this is the process that I followed. It may not necessarily work for everyone, but this is what I would suggest, because it's not just me, it's a lot of other photographers as well. So firstly, start in your own backyard, in your own home with that. So firstly, you practice your skills and explore your camera's potential. Too often we are keen to go and see what we could capture rather than how do we capture it. So number one, practice your skills, explore your camera's potential in your own backyard. Then you move on to your local parks or reserves, usually at the edges of your cities. So it could be a wetland, it could be a lake or some place like that, a reserve forest on the edge of your city. That's where you refine your techniques and you experiment with settings, because now you can move around. In your backyard, you might have been limited, but here you get the opportunity to move. And last is to implement your hard-earned skills and techniques when you go to a wildlife sanctuary, because now you have the skills. So when you spend the money, it's money and time well worth the effort. Because if you have the money, but you don't have the skill, it's of no use. So when you start in your own backyard, a lot of us live in urban environments, a lot of us live in apartments. So when we say in your own backyard, so many people have pets. So this is my friend Sachin Rai's cat. So even during the lockdown, he's photographing his cat at home, right? So this is a great way to practice. It's an animal after all. So using light, composition, you could practice on your pets. Practice on the bird life that comes to your backyard. So even in an urban environment, this was taken at my apartment on the 7th floor balcony. So wait for the right time of day, wait for the birds to come, compose, learn about the bird's behavior. Right? So this is a myna, which is a very common bird across India. Pigeons, this is common across all urban places in the world. There's no city that doesn't have pigeons, right? So they are not only such a common feature, they have a lot of characteristics. They actually have a lot of beautiful plumage. This is a great way to capture them in flight. So you can see them swoop, you can see them glide, you can see them flap. So this would be a great way to train yourself to use your camera to focus to capture birds in flight. Squirrels, one of the most common mammals around, especially in India, in urban environments. So it doesn't have to be only birds. They have a lot of quirky little characteristics in the way they pick up food with their forelegs and eat. So try different compositions. As you can see in this, it's a portrait orientation. Then when you move on to your local parks and reserves, you move on to I wouldn't necessarily say exotic wildlife, but definitely a little bit more uncommon. So in this case, golden back or flameback woodpecker. Pelicans. A lot of wetlands in and around our cities have a lot of waterfowl. So pelicans, cormorants, ducks, geese. So this is again great because firstly, you can move around. You can move, you can look at the light, you can decide where you want to be. You can learn your field craft as to how to get closer to a subject. You can observe their behavior, capture them in flight, capture them landing, capture them preening, brooding, right? So there's a lot of behavior that we can watch, observe, and photograph. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you may even get reptiles. In this case, it's a monitor lizard. So you can get lucky with animals that's not just bird life. So this is in your local parks. Then move on to wildlife sanctuaries. So don't be in a hurry to head to a wildlife sanctuary as soon as you've got your brand new camera. Because if you don't know how to shoot in anything other than automatic setting, you might as well shoot with your mobile phone. Like if you've got a DSLR camera and you want to explore, first learn at home and then go and explore those skills out in a wildlife sanctuary, because wildlife sanctuaries cost money. They're expensive. Your lodging is expensive. Your travel is expensive. The last thing you want to do is to go there, see a fantastic sight and not be able to capture it, right? So it could be elephants, it could be tigers, it could be leopards, it could be whatever it is, depending on where you are, whichever part of the world you're in. So first learn your skills at home, then take them to the wildlife sanctuaries. Right? So the next question is invariably, what gear do I use? So I'm just going to show you guys a few images. So this is a river tern perched on a beautiful rock with a lovely background. This is at Ranganthittu Wildlife Sanctuary. This is the same species. And again, same location. So these two examples of the same bird, same location. One is a greener background, one is a browner background. But when you look at it, can you actually tell which was shot with what camera, what lens? So the reason I'm saying this is a lot of people obsess about which is better. Is Canon better than Nikon? Is Nikon better than Sony? Don't get hung up on that. This is like arguing whether a BMW is better than a Mercedes, is better than an Audi. They all have virtually the same sort of build quality and characteristics, right? It just comes down to personal preference. There could be a particular feature that one model may have slightly better than the other, but you can't say one brand is necessarily better than the other. And that's usually borne out when you see wildlife photography competitions. So different people with different cameras and lenses win these competitions, right? So when you look at this, would you be able to tell what camera? No, you can't. Would you be able to tell what lens? No, you can't. So what matters here is that these two images were taken 5 years apart. One was taken in 2014 and the other was taken in 2019. Right? So one was taken with an entry-level Nikon D3200 with the Sigma 150-500 lens, which is kind of one of the most popular lenses that people use when they get into wildlife photography, because it gives them a good range. It's fairly inexpensive. And the bottom photo was taken with a Nikon D5 and a 500mm f4, which is a professional setup. But when you look at the two images, you can't necessarily decide. Once you know which was shot with what, you'll be, okay, yeah, I can see that this is a little better, that is a little better. When you look at it at first glance, you wouldn't. Again, look at two examples. A pelican picking up a stick from the water and flying. Similar behavior. One is against the light, one is with the light. Two cameras, two different lenses, 5 years apart. Can you automatically say one is definitely so much better than the other? So when you look at this image, now this for sure was with an excellent top-end camera because of the beautiful creamy foreground and the creamy background. Yeah, so you can see the beautiful detail in this, as well as in this image. So shot upwards when this bird is flying against the light, you can see the beautiful feather detail. So you know that this was a top-end camera and lens, right? Wrong. Both were shot with a Nikon D3200 and Sigma 15500. It had nothing to do with the quality of the gear. It had to do with the fact that I was fairly close to the subject, had the right settings, and that's what matters. So the point is not to obsess about gear. Right? When you read these two, the people tend to immediately put up statistics. Oh, this has so many focus points, this focal points, this has so much of an ISO range. All of that is great. That doesn't necessarily make you a better photographer. Focus on what you have at hand. This quote by Chase Jarvis, who's one of the most famous photographers in the world right now, is something that's an absolute clincher. Is that the best camera is the one that you have with you at that moment. It's all about your skills and your skill level. Develop your skills and then get better gear. So don't chase gear. So coming to composition. So when earlier I said photography is the art of telling a story without words. So then what is composition? What role does composition play in that story? If you think about, in this case, we're talking about photography, but if we talk about music, musical composition, or a movie with screenplay, right? So everywhere composition plays a role. And in photography, composition is what rhythm is to music. That's how I feel about it. So any image that you make has to have a rhythm. It has to be able to tell that story so that you're able to read that image. It's supposed to tell the story of what is happening in that scene. In this case, a beautiful landscape with golden savanna grasslands, stormy skies, and then the largest animal on earth looking like a tiny little insignificant speck. Most of us, when we start taking portrait shots, right? So portraits, it's all about the eyes. So the eyes tell the story. The eyes are the windows to the soul. So when you take a portrait, whether it's a mammal or whether it's a bird, when you have that eye contact, the important thing here to get this is to put your focus point on the eye of the animal, or at least between the eyes when they're looking straight at you, right? So this is the key, because you never get impressed by any photograph when you have the nose sharp or the eyes out of focus, or the hairs, at the back, say the mane of the lion is sharp, but the eyes are out of focus, or the paw is in focus, the eyes are out of focus. It's always the eyes. We are immediately drawn to the eyes. But we don't always have cases where the animals are walking towards us. Right? Sometimes they could be walking at an angle. So in which case, where do you focus? So as you can see in this image, there's a tiger and there are both eyes. So you focus on the eye that's nearest to you. Right? The same case, so this is a much closer shot of a lion. You can see both eyes are in focus, but it's the eye on the left that's sharper, because that's the one that's closest. That's the one that we tend to first look at. We tend to see what's closest to us before our eye then moves through the rest of the image. So why are eyes important? So there's this beautiful spotted owlet having a drink of water, beautiful reflection, lovely little action where it's drinking water. Nice image. But that is what is going to give you that instant connection, because now you can tell the sort of the character of the animal, the personality, the soul of what that bird is through the eyes. It's a raptor. You can see that intensity in the eyes, and you see it in the reflection. And now, is the bird looking at itself? Is it aware of itself? Immediately, you start reading into what the image is about. In this case, an elephant playing in the water. So this is a perspective that we don't usually get to see with an elephant throwing its head back, tossing its trunk. But look at its eye. The eye is still looking. So we're all in a jeep, and the eye of this animal, it was still watching us. No matter what it was doing, it was playing, but it was watching us. So there's that curiosity, that intensity, that playfulness, even for an animal like this. The same image, if I didn't have eye contact, it doesn't engage automatically. But it's not just fun. So when you look at this image, you can tell straight away the emotion is fear. Fear because there was a larger hippo to the side, and that just went berserk. And this guy immediately moved, and you can see the fear frozen in the eye. You can see the energy from the water around the body, but look at the expression in the eye. So the eyes always tell a story. This is something that happens frequently when people don't recompose, they don't refocus. When this leopard is walking away from me, its tail, its butt is closer to me than its head. So if I focus on its tail or its butt, the head is always going to be out of focus when it turns. So I always have to keep the focus point ahead. So when it turns in a moment like it did here, it's the eye that's sharp, it's the face, because they're all in the same plane. The eye, the nose, the whiskers are sharp, and the tail is out of focus. As much as eyes are important, with animals, ears are important. Why? Have you ever, if you've got a pet, if you ever talk to your dog and say something, if you notice the dog might be looking somewhere else, but the ears twitch, or a cat, or even a cow on the street. So in this case, a wildebeest. So the wildebeest is looking straight at me, but look at the ears. The ears are also facing forward. Its full attention is in my direction. So that's why it's an engaging shot. So it's not just a wildebeest, this is another antelope called a topi. So all of these animals, especially wild animals, they tend to move the ears independently. So it might be looking front, but the ear might turn to the right, it might turn to the left. Getting that moment when the ears and the eyes are in sync is when you have that complete sense of the animal giving you its full attention. In this case, a rhino in Kaziranga. So the curiosity of the animal, there's no expression on the face, but look at the ears. The ears are immediately giving you that sense of, I'm interested in what's happening there with that mammal in the jeep, right? So it's showing you that it's interested in you. And that's what you need to always capture. And it's not single animals. So these are bat-eared foxes in Tanzania. So you see all three of them are paying attention to whatever little activity is going on in front. Now look at this shot of a jackal, straight on, it's looking straight at me in the camera. Its attention is completely focused on me, right? But look at that ear. And now look at that. Completely different. Which image shows you the attention of the animal? It's also important that when you take a photograph, take more than one, because sometimes we might even forget these little things in the field. When we go back, we've got about 7, 8 of these shots. Remember, we live in the digital age. You can always just delete it in a second. When you find an image like this, oh yeah, this is the one with the ears in front and everything else, the ears are pointing in some other direction. That's the one that you want to keep. Right. So coming to one of the important sort of tenets in photography, this is, I would say, important at the same time. It's a very basic rule, which is the rule of thirds. So what is the rule of thirds? Ultimately, the rule of thirds, to put it very simply, is don't do what I've done in this picture, which is put the animal right in the middle of the frame. Why? Because the lion is not posing for a passport photo. It's only in a passport photo that they put you right in the middle of the frame, right? And you're in that box and look straight. So wildlife, or even most other photography, you don't ideally want to do that. There are times when you do that, but ideally, you want the animal off to the side, moving into the space. So now, this is what the rule of thirds is. The rule of thirds is that your screen or your viewfinder in your camera would be divided into a series of lines, into a series of thirds. So you have 2 lines vertically, 2 lines horizontally, and ideally speaking, you try to place your subject on one of those intersecting points, right? So which one of those intersecting points? So in this case, the animal is moving from right to left, and I've got a little bit of landscape that you can see at the back, so I want it at the bottom right. In this case, it's an osprey coming into land. So here, If I look at the subject as the bird, I have to look at the entirety of the subject. So the wings, right from wingtip to talon at the bottom, is in its entirety. So I wanted a large part of the animal to be on the right top right intersecting point as it's coming in, because it's moving from the top down. So I want to leave space down at the bottom to give that sense of movement from where to where it's moving. In this case, there's no movement. It's a silhouette. It's 4 giraffes. They're all just hanging around. But again, I've moved them to the left. So it gives you that sense of space that maybe, hey, these guys are going to move into the right. Or maybe there's something else that's going to come from the right. Again, it's asking a question, or it's making you think, what is that space for? Is there something going to happen there? Okay. In this case, this is a tiny little bush frog. This is in Valparai in Tamil Nadu, in the Western Ghats. So this frog is as big as my thumbnail. It's a tiny little bush frog. It's an endemic species. Most of them are endangered. And why is it endangered? That's the reason for this image. So I don't know if you guys can recognize the plant it's sitting on. That's a coffee bush. So a coffee bush has replaced what the natural landscape is, of the natural ecosystem is of these frogs. So when I make this image, I want to tell the entire story of where this frog lives and where it's living now. Imagine if I cropped it off and showed only the frog. I'm not telling the story. But now when I use the entire composition of all of those coffee beans and the frog as one subject. So that entirety is my subject, right? So it's not just the frog. If I cut off all the coffee beans, there's no story. It's just a frog. And also you don't get a sense of the scale of how tiny that frog is. The rule of thirds works just as well for portraits. It's not only for landscape orientation. Again, bottom left. In this case, it's a peacock and the head is up. So I've put it at the top left because it's looking to the right of the image. So how does the rule of thirds work in a detailed shot like this? Right? So now I just spoke about where it's looking, where it's moving. Now the eye is looking straight at me. There is no sense of which way it's moving. But in terms of dividing the frame, you still divide the frame. And I put the eye, the pupil, on a power point, which is that intersection of the points. Right? So immediately it becomes an engaging image. In this case, it's a reflection. So I've got it right through the middle of the frame. So is there no rule of thirds? Nope, I'm still following the rule of thirds because I've got the subject on an intersection point and I've got its reflection just below another intersection point. So this is how, so in a reflection shot like this, it's absolutely fine to put it in the middle. You don't have to put it to the bottom because if you put it to the bottom, you lose the reflection. This is a bending of the rule of thirds. Now, if you notice, there are multiple subjects. You can see 4 of them looking at me. 2 or 3 of them are eating. But is this the rule of thirds? Yes, because I've still got it at the bottom third. I've taken the entire bottom panel as a third of my frame, right? Because I wanted to showcase those beautiful colors in the sky. Look at the color of the earth. The earth is just monotone brown. So if I put these guys up and I show the earth, there's not much interest. But when I show that sky now, that beautiful tones of pink and the orange in the sky and it's just blending up, that's where your eye automatically goes and sees through the colors. Similar subjects, again, Indian wild ass in the little run of Kutch. This is an exception. Why? I've got them smack bang in the middle of my frame. So it's 3 of them walking through a pool of water. So rule of thirds, there's no particular left, there's no particular right. I've left some space on the right. That's something that I'll come to next. But I've put these guys right in the middle. Why? Because they have a beautiful reflection. If I was going to put them at the bottom or the top, then the balance with the reflection goes out. So there are always exceptions, which is why I prefer not to call it the rule of thirds. I like to think of it as a suggestion of thirds or a guideline of thirds. It's to help you think of how you want to compose, but don't think of it as a hard and fast rule. Another exception. So there's a pelican flying straight at me. It makes no sense if I was to put this guy in the top left, bottom right, top right, bottom left, because it's gone wingtip to wingtip almost the entire frame, and it's coming straight at the camera. So I put it smack bang in the middle because it's a very symmetric image. So symmetry works best by putting it in the image, in the center, as in this case. So this is the same line that I showed you before. So now I put him on the bottom left corner, following the rule of thirds. So I've achieved my rule of thirds. But there's still something off in this image, right? Why? Because the animal is moving to the left, but I've not left any space for it to move. I've left all the space behind it. So this is what we call positive space, is that we leave space when, in whatever direction a subject is looking, leave space in that direction, because that's where the action is. So in this case, this is a common bird that we find all around in our cities. The Asian coal is a female. So it's calling to another bird. Now, if it was calling to the left, and I did this, it wouldn't make any sense. So now, automatically, in our mind, we can feel that there's something happening outside of the frame to the right. So that's the power of the positive space. In this case, this is an elephant in the Ngorongoro crater in Tanzania. Now, I shot this, my D500. This is a 16 to 80 mm wide angle lens, okay? So for people who think you need only fancy gear to get a shot, no. This is virtually a kit lens. So why did I not shoot this with a 500 mm? Is because if I shot this with a 500 mm, it's just another portrait of an elephant. What does it tell me in terms of a story about where this elephant lives? What conditions? How does it tell me that this is Ngorongoro crater? It's only when I leave the space. So positive space is not only about cropping, it's the way we compose, it's the lenses that we choose. In this case, I chose a wide angle lens because that's the lens that's telling the story of, hey, this is a crater, this is an animal that's living in an ecosystem that is completely different from the rest of Africa. It's an old volcanic crater and it's inside. And look at the storm clouds and look at the space. I've left the space on the right, and that's where the clouds are creeping in and coming into them. So you want to tell the story by choosing the right lens, not just cropping in post-production. So sometimes it can be even funny, right? So you have this gawky looking flamingo slapping the water with its feet and it's running. So is it running from something? Is it the last guy to catch up with the rest of the flock? You don't know, but immediately the questions of your mind is asking, hey, what's going on here? Where is this bird going? Right? So you have to leave space for it to move into the frame. So positive space, in this case, you can see the leopard, you can see the head, you can see the eye, it's looking up, the paw, there's the intention of movement. So this is a little thing of a lesson within a lesson, that when you take in a shot of an animal that's on the move, try to always get it when that front paw lifts or the front leg. So that gives you intention that it's moving in that direction. Try to get the legs separate from each other. So that really defines the sort of the form of the animal, right? So positive space. So ultimately, while this is a nice shot, in this series, I completely messed up. Because at that time when I took the shot, I thought the leopard was coming down the tree. I did not realize that it came down, but it was looking up at the side and then it basically jumped up. So I was prepared to follow it down. And when it jumped up and I tried to compensate and take the shot, I cut the head off. Also a leopard on a tree. Now, because I've taken a shot like that of a leopard, I've taken a few shots of a leopard coming down a tree. I didn't want to repeat the same process. So I chose a 70-200 mm lens. And again, I wanted to showcase this landscape. Look at, this is the difference in Africa and in India. So in India, people have seen leopards. Leopards are in the forests, they're in the jungles. But in Africa, it's an open grassland system. So you have one tree here, there's another tree there, and that's the kind of world that the leopard operates in, when there are lions and hyenas and other animals around, right? So this leopard is coming down the tree, and I've left space to the right because that's where intentionally your mind is reading that the animal is going to come down the tree and then run in that direction. Even if it didn't, you wouldn't know that. But because I've left space there, your mind is playing fill in the blanks. And it's telling you, oh, that's where the leopard is going to go. Okay, and can you guys spot the leopard? So there's a leopard under the cactus above the rock. This is Bera in Rajasthan, which is so far removed from the landscape of Africa. So we just saw grassland. That's a leopard, so is this. But if I was to zoom in and take a 500 mm shot, a tight portrait of a leopard, I'm not doing justice to say where this is. What world is this leopard living in? What is its environment? So here you can tell, wow, look at this. There's so many little caves and nooks and crannies, and this animal lives in there. And if that animal just went behind a rock, you wouldn't even know it existed, right? So using composition to tell the story. Positive space, again, as I showed you before with the pelican flying straight on. I prefer this image to the previous image that I showed. The reason being that the space around, look at the fog, the little vortices, the little eddies, because of the way the pelican has flapped its wings, you can see the fog curling around. So using that positive space all around allows you to see what is happening, what impact your subject has on the element. So connecting with your subject, this is something that's very common. People will say shoot at eye level, and many people think shooting at eye level means shooting from ground level. The idea is to get eye level with your subject, according to the height of your subject. So in this case, this is in Africa, and you can see these two guys there in a jeep, standing at the top. Also using a vehicle in Africa, but now we're shooting from the windows. Also a vehicle. So you see in all three vehicles, in all three images, we've got vehicles, but we're using the vehicles very differently. In the bottom one, the vehicle is only to get us from point A to point B. And then after that, we get out and then we shoot lying flat on the ground. So why is that important? Because the landscape is completely different. The subjects we're shooting are very different. So look at this. This is an imperial eagle from the little Ran of Kutch in Gujarat. So I have this beautiful clean background. I have catch light in the eye, the bird's looking, I've got my rule of thirds happening, all of that. It's an okay image. But this is what we took when we were in the Jeep. But after we got down from the Jeep and lay flat, that's the image. It completely transforms, because now you're seeing that as a bird of prey, as a raptor, and you are smaller visually in this image than the bird of prey. So now you feel what it feels to be a prey of this animal. And now suddenly it looks much larger than life, right? And it's up against this beautiful blue sky. Very lucky to have a leopard walking straight. So the paws up, eye contact, right? What is this eye level? It looks eye level-ish, but it's not. So we were quite far when this was starting to walk towards us. But now look at it. That's eye level. It looks like I'm lying on the ground because of the grass in the shot, right? So when we got into this little ditch, it brought us completely at eye level, and she just kept walking straight towards us. So that's how you get to eye level with a subject like this. Also a leopard, but now up in a tree. So how did we get to eye level? I didn't climb another tree. This was simply about standing in the vehicle and standing on the seat, so it got height, and now shooting at eye level of the subject. So you use whatever means necessary to get to eye level. Also in the little Ran of Kutch, this is a fairly common bird, grey francolin, beautifully camouflaged. As you can see, it's very hard to spot. And you have this lovely sort of ground cover. So I took this shot. It looks like it's ground level, isn't it? But it's not. Again, took this from the Jeep. And then when I got down, that's the effect. So when you come down to eye level, first thing you're doing is immediately is look at the background difference. It's the same patch. The bird is in the same patch of bush. It's just that the moment you come down, you get this beautiful foreground blur and you get the background blur. And now look at the bird. It's isolated above the plants, right? And you've got that eye contact. You've got the little highlight in the eye. Now, when we talk about macro photography, whether it's frogs and snakes, usually we are looking down because they're in bushes. So this is, again, a little bush frog from Valparaiso. So the idea here was to get it, if you guys have never heard frogs croaking, if you've heard them croak, this is usually what happens. They distend their vocal sac, which helps them to call out to females as well as warning other males. So I was waiting to get that shot. So beautifully distended, got the light using a torchlight. It's nice. But I'm still looking at it from a different perspective. I'm not in the frog's world. So I need to get into the frog's world. And this is what brings me down into the frog's world. Now look at the detail. Look at the size of the vocal sac in relation to the frog. Look at the color of the underbelly of the frog. You can see this faint little lilac. You can see the texture on the underside of the frog, right? The size of the eye is so much larger now. So coming down, if it means kneeling, sitting, lying down, come to eye level with your subject. Knowing your subject. Knowing your subject is one of the most critical parts of wildlife photography. Why is that important? Because when you know an animal's behavior, you can sort of predict and say, oh, I know that these animals do this. So I will wait for that behavior to happen, right? So in this case, there's this lion cub that I photographed in the Masai Mara in Kenya. The pride had made a kill. They killed a zebra. So there were a couple of lionesses off to the left. They'd fed, and then the cubs were feeding. This cub fed, and it was walking straight towards a lioness. Now, because I know that cats, when they meet each other, they will nuzzle. They will rub against each other. That's how they reinforce their social bonds, especially lions, because they live in a pride. So knowing that's going to happen, I'm all excited. I'm waiting, right? Because this cub's moving, the lioness is here. Then as it comes to the lioness, they're both going to rub each other, nuzzle. And that's exactly what happened. Now, if I did not know that lions did this, what would I be doing? I would be just taking a shot of the lioness or a shot of the cub. And when I see them do this, I'll be, oh my God, what a great shot. And then I pick up the camera. By the time I do that, gone. So this cub did not stop to nuzzle with the lioness. It just kept moving. As it moved, it just rubbed its cheek and just kept going. So if I had to see this moment, then pick up my camera, then focus, then shoot, the moment's gone. So knowing your subject makes all the difference between getting this shot and getting this shot. So this is not the shot that you want to get. Capturing shots of very fast-moving birds like this woodland kingfisher in flight. So I didn't know about the behavior of this bird. This was the first time that I saw it. But what we observed was this, it would sit on a bush and it would fly down. This is not eating, this bird doesn't eat fish per se. It eats any little lizards, any insects and stuff like that. It kept flying down to a termite mound, picking up termites, coming back to the same bush, eating them, flying back. It did it 3 or 4 times. So what I did to get this flight shot was that I kept the bush that it was sitting on the left, focused on it. And I left space for the bird to fly down to the right because that's the direction it kept going. So after it came back, I didn't wait for it to fly because it's so fast. By the time I realize it flies and then I click, it's gone. So after it came back, I just kept the camera in the same place, just kept clicking. And then when it flew down, I got it in flight, right? So I didn't know about the subject beforehand, but it was observation of the behavior at sight that helped to get the shot. Any of the big cats, when they mate, at the end of the mating, the male would bite the female at the back of the neck. So when he bites, she would snarl and turn around. And so we observed this pair doing that every maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then they would keep moving. They'd do it over and over again. But what would happen was this guy was particularly jumpy at the end. When she would turn and snarl, he would literally throw himself back. So knowing that was going to happen, I waited, I composed vertically, so I would give him space to move into the shot, and then got this. Right? So you can see the intensity of the moment because of his mane flying. Look at the tail, right? So that instant when she turned and snarled at him, and he immediately threw himself back. So if I didn't know what happens, I would see this, and by the time I click, that moment is gone. So knowing what they do and observing their behavior is what helps you to get those shots. Bee-eaters are very common birds, both in Africa and in India. So this is in India, this is a green bee-eater. So it's got a little, as the name suggests, it's got a bee. So which is a nice shot because it's got a bee and you've got a feeding shot. But what's important here to know is how this bird feeds. Is that after it catches its prey, it tosses it in the air. So that's the shot that you want to get. If you're just satisfied with this shot, and think, oh, it's got the bee, it's over, now look for something else, you miss the shot. So watching this bird, they will catch their prey, then whack them against the branch that's sitting, and then toss it up. When they toss it up, that's the moment that you want to capture. So this was one of the most memorable experiences I had. This is in Bandhavgarh, of this fantastic tigress walking head on, and beautiful eye contact, paws raised. But this shot almost never happened because when we found this tigress, it was us and about 15 other jeeps. We were one of the first to get there, then all the other jeeps came. As usual, the guys call each other on the phone, and they all turn up there, and it was like a fish market. The tiger was in the forest. It did not want to come out because of the crowd. And so people were yelling, hey, tiger, tiger. The tiger didn't want to come out. It just kept pacing up and down in the forest. Our guide said, she wants to come out. Let's go ahead. Further down the track, we'll just go ahead and wait. I thought, this guy knows what he's doing, right? He's the guide. He knows this subject. I don't know the subject. Trust him. So we drove. When we drove off, every jeep looked at us like we were crazy because there's a tiger there and we're leaving the tiger and we're driving off. They thought, what's wrong with these guys? So we drove around a corner and waited. 5 minutes later, she came out of the forest and walked on the road. But because she came onto the road, no vehicle could overtake her. So all the vehicles got trapped behind her. So when she came around the corner for the first about 45 seconds or about a minute or two, I had her entirely to myself, head on, walking on the track. And moments later, this was the scene. This is the same group of people that were there. This is the group that we left and came. Had we waited with them, she would have walked on the road and we would have only got the back of the tiger. But because the guide knew, he said, sir, this is what she will do. She wants to come out on the road. She will walk. This is when I did not know about my subject, but I had to give weightage to the person who knew the subject, who's the driver guide. So this is also a lesson for you guys. Whenever you go on any safari anywhere, talk to your guides, talk to your drivers, ask them questions, show interest. Don't just say, I want to see a tiger, I want to see a leopard. They know what they know you don't want to go and see the library. They know what you've come there for, right? So talk to them. When you engage with them, they will tell you what this tiger is like, what that animal is like, where she likes to come and drink, what tree this guy likes to mark. They will do all of these things, and then they will go out of their way to put you in the right spot to get the shot. So if it wasn't for that guide, this is the situation we would have faced. So looking at this image, is she angry at another lion? Is she snarling at her prey? Is she snarling at her cubs? She's yawning. She's not snarling. Now, anybody looks at that and goes, how is this a yawn? It doesn't look like a yawn at all. She looks so ferocious. This is what big cats look like at the end of the yawn. So when they start the yawn, this is what it looked like. The tongue would be out, and then the next shot, the lips curl back, the fangs are exposed, the tongue is still out, and then the tongue is drawn in, and they scrunch the face. And at the end, they will open their eyes. And when you take the shot at that point, it is so hard to tell whether it was a yawn or whether it was a snarl. And that's the shot that you want. So when you see something yawning, don't take 2 shots and wait. 10, 15 shots you got to get. Or wait towards the end of the yawn and get it. Vultures always squabble. So if you guys ever come across vultures, you'll always find that they will fight. And when they fight, there's always a chance that one guy will pounce on the other guy. And then in series, this is what happens. So seeing this one particular bird picking fights with other birds, I kept focusing only on this one bird. And when he jumped up on this guy and kicked him in the face, got the shot. If you've got pets at home, or if you've just observed animals, you notice they don't like getting wet. When they get wet, the water soaks their coat. So what's the first thing they try to do? They try to shake it off. So wild cats are no different. So with three of them, it was just a question of which one is going to do it first. But that was what I was waiting for, to capture this moment. When the one in the middle shook itself, and now look at the cheetah on the right, getting splashed full in the face, not bad enough it's raining, and then the sibling splashes it with more water. It's a story being told at that moment. But if you see the action and then click, it's gone. It's too late. A peregrine falcon in the Little Run of Kutch. So every bird has its own little telltale behavior. Every raptor has its own telltale behavior. In this case, the peregrine falcon, sitting on this little stone here, it started to adjust itself. As it started to adjust itself, I know that it's going to fly. So I'm waiting. I've composed. I left space for it. When it flies perfectly, it's turning, it's adjusting. Now it's looking straight at me, and then it takes off. Except it took off in the direction that I didn't expect. What can I do about it? Nothing. So remember, this is what we said. You can plan, but you can't control. I knew it was going to fly. I was hoping it was going to fly. And when it flew, it did, but it flew in the direction that I was not prepared for, right? But still, to get the shot, it's about observing that behavior and knowing, oh, it's going to take off. Hey, it's going to do this. It's going to do that. So at the end of the day, photography is not about capturing what you see. It's about capturing what you feel. What is happening in that moment? Try to capture the emotion of that moment, right? So if you guys have any questions, this is a great time to type them in the chat box, and I will look at your questions and I will try to answer them as best as I can. We've got a lot of questions here. Okay, so this is a good question. It says, how to avoid noise in low light situations. Now, I understand that when a lot of people start wildlife photography, they don't necessarily have the best of gear. So when you have, say, entry-level gear or intermediate gear, low light conditions are a bit of a problem, but that's okay. It doesn't stop you from going out and exploring, because firstly, you understand the nature of what the wildlife does. What does an animal do at dusk? What does an animal do at dawn when it just gets up and it's out hunting? So it's very important to be able to witness that. Capturing that is the second half of it. So the first thing that you could do is obviously shoot as wide open as you can, as wide as your lens allows. If you've got an f4 lens, shoot at f4. If you've got an f5.6 lens, shoot at f5.6. The second thing that I find is that a lot of people tend to, they've either heard from somebody else or they've decided for themselves that they've got a ceiling, that, oh, I'm never going to shoot then higher than ISO 3000 or whatever it is. They fix a ceiling, and I don't understand why that is, because what is more important is not getting the shot more important, or getting the shot with a little bit of grain and fixing it in post-production. It's obviously getting the shot and then trying to fix it in post-production that's more important. Standing on principle and saying, I will never shoot above ISO so-and-so is now going to help you get the shot and understand what your camera is capable of. And today, there are all kinds of plug-in softwares that you can use. For example, I use Topaz Denoise. Topaz Denoise is an excellent noise removal software. So you can use that. There are other things, even in Lightroom, where you can reduce the amount of noise. And most of us are posting for Instagram or for Facebook. So go ahead and don't be bogged down in the principle of not shooting in low light. Yeah? All right, so the next question that we've got is a UV or ND filter necessary for wildlife photography? Okay, so let me preface this by saying that when you look at most professional wildlife photographers, they are not putting a UV filter on an ND, a UV filter on the front of their cameras. Look, you guys are going to spend a lot of money. Even an entry-level super telephoto lens like a Tamron 150-600 or a Sigma 150-600 is going to cost $75,000 or a lakh of rupees or whatever it is in your currency, the last thing you want to do is put a cheap piece of glass in front of that for the purpose of cutting UV or whatever it is. Don't even bother. Where people use a lot of UV filters is when they're shooting landscapes with water, with reflections and things like that. Now, if you're going to be shooting wildlife, and I've done this with an ND filter, and I've done it only once, and that was in the Masai Mara, where I was shooting this crocodile that was basking on a rock in the middle of the river, of the Mara River. And because when crocodiles bask, they don't move. They just sit there with their jaws agape. It was a good opportunity for me to use an ND filter and take about a 15-second exposure. I think I used maybe an ND8 or an ND10 filter, and I used a 15-second exposure. I did a 30-second exposure. And the idea was just to get the water silky smooth, because obviously it's turbulent water. So the animal is sitting still. That was the only time I've ever used an ND filter. But it's always good to carry around, but don't bother with putting a cheap filter on the front of your lens. You're not going to do yourself any favors. Okay, this is one of the most common questions that I get, is how to make money in wildlife photography. So how to make money in wildlife photography and how to become a wildlife photographer, a professional wildlife photographer, kind of go hand in hand. So here's the first thing. If you want to make money in wildlife photography, if you're thinking that I'm going to go out, I've got gear, I'm going to go shoot tigers or bears or lions or whatever it is, remember that when you're shooting in Bandhavgarh or Ranthambore, Kabini, any place, wherever you are, and you're taking that shot of a tiger that's walked out of that forest and you're clicking away, just pay attention to the other shutters tripping behind you, because for sure you've got at least 15, 20 other people with similar gear taking the same shot. And tomorrow they're all uploading that same image up on Instagram. Why are you uploading it on Instagram? And then you're going to tag all the magazines and publications and Nat Geo and everyone. Maybe someone is interested. But when they see 20 people with the same image, whose image do you think they're going to choose? It's very difficult. It's very competitive. Number one. Number two, if you want to make money in wildlife photography in the sense that you want to be a professional wildlife photographer, you have to understand that first you have to be a people person. Why? Because most professional wildlife photographers conduct workshops and they conduct guided tours. These are the two main things that they do. Yes, sometimes they do sell prints, but that's not a monthly income and you can never predict that. So when you talk about conducting workshops, firstly you have to know your gear inside out. Not just the camera that you use, the system that you use. For example, I use Nikon because that's what I've always used. Right? I would also have to know my Canon systems. I would also have to know Sony, because if I conduct a workshop and then I have 15, 20 people in that workshop, people are going to come with a different array of camera gear, but firstly from different makers. Second is they're going to be at different levels, intermediate, professional, beginners. So I would need to know every system, because when I say get into so-and-so and change the setting, I would need to know how to tell someone to do that. Right? If I don't know the system, I can't do that. Number one. Number two is that when you take people on tours, remember that if you love wildlife photography and that's why you want to be a wildlife photographer, when you take people on a guided tour, you're not engaging in wildlife photography. You are helping your clients engage in wildlife photography. If you're a mentor, you have to be on the ball helping your clients get images. When I travel with my friends and mentors who are professional wildlife photographers, they always put the client's need first and their own needs last. So which also means that they get the least amount of shots. Sometimes the most amazing sequence happens and they're not shooting it because they're not in the right position to do that. And that's what it takes to be a professional wildlife photographer, is to say that I'm not doing this for myself, I'm leading clients. Because if the moment you put your needs ahead of your clients, that would be the last tour that you ever do. Because the word would be out like that. Everyone's going to be like, I went on so-and-so's tour and that guy or that girl is only interested in their own photography and not helping their clients. So be a people person. You'd have to know your camera gear inside out. You would have to be a very meticulous planner. There's a lot of planning that goes into it. When you conduct even a 3 or 4 day tour, you have to make the bookings. You have to get the permits. You have to organize the vehicles. If it's international permits, you have to talk to the lodges. You have to know at which time of the year which place has better sightings and choose the lodges accordingly. You have to do your homework. There's a lot of stuff. It's not just picking up your camera, picking up your lens and saying, let's go and take photographs. Yeah. So I hope that answers the question. Okay, so this is a question obviously from someone who's still in college. And the question is, okay, I'm passionate about wildlife photography. Should I quit engineering to pursue wildlife photography? Okay, for example, I'm not a professional wildlife photographer. This is what I do as a hobby. I'm a professional landscape architect. That's what helps me pay the bills. That's what helps me pay for these tours that I go on, to indulge in my hobby. And then I can get to share with you guys, as you know, my images, or do a webinar like this, or put out YouTube videos. It's not that I wouldn't want to consider being a professional wildlife photographer, but I already gave you the reasons why I wouldn't want to do that. It's a very cutthroat field. Don't think you can become an overnight internet sensation. It takes a lot of hard work, and there's a lot of people fighting for elbow room for small margins of money. I would really suggest you don't do that. Enjoy wildlife photography as a hobby. Become an engineer, get that degree, work hard, save money, use that money, buy gear, rent gear, go on trips, do whatever it is that within reason allows you to enjoy your wildlife photography. But for heaven's sake, don't throw away an education for this. Tomorrow, your education is going to help you get a job. However boring you may think it may be, it will provide for you. Wildlife photography, however exciting it is not going to put food on the table for you. So please stay in college, finish your degree, and enjoy wildlife photography as a hobby. Once you get past that stage where you know for sure, I've worked long enough, I've made my money, but I now want to explore this. That's okay, you can do it because you still have a degree in hand. Tomorrow, if this doesn't work out, you've got to fall back. But if you quit your degree halfway through, you've got nothing in hand. Please don't do that. Okay, so because I spoke about the rule of thirds earlier as one of the sort of tenets of composition, one of the basic tenets of composition. Here's a question here. Would it be a good idea to manage the rule of thirds in post-processing? What are the downsides? Okay, this is a very good question. So let me step back and say, most of us, when we start, we pick up our cameras, we use a center focus point, we put the subject right in the middle, we take a shot, and then we come back in Lightroom or in Photoshop, we recompose the image, right? Which is okay. Most of us start that way. It's an okay place to start with, but don't stay there. You have to move beyond that, because the goal is to compose in camera. Remember, the more you compose in camera and get your composition right, the less effort and importance you're giving to recomposing in Lightroom or in Photoshop. Why is this important? If you are submitting an image for a competition, it might be a fantastic image when you send it in as a JPEG. Now, if your image is shortlisted, and then they want to see a raw image, and if your raw image has your subject smack bang in the middle, it completely throws off your submitted image, which says, hey, look at this, look at the way this bird is, or this animal is in this corner, and it's going that way, which is the reason why they picked your image. But your raw image says, nope, I didn't pay attention to any of that. I had it smack bang in the middle, and then I composed later in my computer. Use the rule of thirds, obviously, to compose in post-processing, but only to remove distractions or to highlight your image in a better way that you could than what you could do in camera. Firstly, because there is a tolerance of distance between the animal and you, especially when it comes to birds. Birds don't like you to beyond beyond a particular distance. So when you're shooting at that distance, there would be things that are most of the time distracting that you would want to crop out. Sometimes you're on a safari, there's another vehicle coming into the shot, you'd want to crop that out. There would be so many reasons why you have to crop and recompose. But you don't recompose from the sense of moving your animal that was on the right of the frame to the left of the frame. That's drastic kind of recomposition. I'm just talking about excluding little things from the frame, right? So that's what you should focus on doing when you're recomposing with the rule of thirds while post-processing. Just looking at removing distractions and bringing sharper clarity to the story that you want to tell. Right. Okay, guys. So I think so. These are five of the questions that I'm looking at right now. There were a whole lot of other questions, but I want to keep this short. But thank you guys for joining me, and I hope you guys enjoyed this webinar. And always remember, guys, may the focus be with you.